I didn't know how important the breathwork journeys would be for grief, but the people that have come, the community that has grown up around us has been overwhelming with joy.
And that's why we created this podcast, the Embracing Human podcast.
Mhm.
How do you embrace the full human experience and spectrum of all of it?
What's really been fascinating for me is to hear, to your point, the raw truth that comes when people breathe and when people get past the protection parts in the mind and they share.
This call that we're all having on a deeper level of authentic expression. And everybody's version is different, but the end boss that we're up against is the identity of ourselves.
When I decided to take a right instead of a left, my entire life I would have gone left. That was the moment of surrender, and for me, when my journey of recovery really started.
That wonder, you talked earlier about losing imagination and creativity and then finding it exogenously sold to you. We come back to the wonder and the beauty of the present moment and being like, God, this thing is infinite.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Embracing Human podcast.
Before we begin the next episode, I'd like to take a quick moment to ask for your support in helping us grow our podcast.
Take a moment to like, subscribe, or follow on whatever platform you're watching this on.
Your engagement helps us to grow our platform as well as allows us to invite even more interesting interviews in the future. I hope you enjoy the following episode and wish that you gain insight, clarity, or knowledge about what it means for you to embrace being human. Welcome and thank you for coming back to another episode of the Embracing Human podcast. I am here today with a very special human that I met here on Maui. He is a Swiss Army knife of healing, a breathwork instructor, a sobriety retreat center facilitator, owner, a music maker, a father, a husband, an all-around just amazing human. Without further ado, I'm excited to introduce you all to Brother Nick Terry, TNT.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Grateful to be here, man.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
I remember clear as day the day I was flying to Maui. As I was landing on the tarmac, I already knew what was coming. Of like, I was so deep in my grief and needing to heal through the passing of my dog. I Facebook evented breathwork, and the Breath of Life journeys came up, and I was there probably the next weekend.
Yeah,
I think I said to you, I was like, it feels really good to be the student again sometimes.
totally.
And to not hold that space, to set it down, and your lanai, your backyard, your home has been a really welcoming and safe place for me to work through some of my emotions and to scream and howl and just hug. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing here on Maui and for the greater good of humanity.
I appreciate you too. And I remember when you first came and connected. That's probably been one of the biggest highlights for us, is in creating the community organically, not having any idea how it would all unfold and develop, but just with the purpose of sharing the medicine and having people come. The fires happened really right after we started the Lahaina fires, which was a big traumatic event for the island. And I didn't know how important the breathwork journeys would be for grief, for loss. That was not the intention going into it. But the people that have come and the community that has grown up around us has been overwhelming and with joy and gratitude. And so having you there and having your presence and your wisdom, and also allowing yourself, like you mentioned, to be a student or just be a participant, even though your skill set is also a facilitator, and just allowing that, sharing from your heart. When we share from the heart, it connects with the heart, right? And that has been hearing the stories, hearing what people go through and experience, and just that human condition is very inspiring. So I appreciate you landing there and then continuing to come back. And that was really the purpose of creating the space. And everything that's unfolded as it's developed has just been like overwhelming, but also super meaningful.
I really appreciate what you said about, honoring the human experience and You know, we hear these quotes like, everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hold a circle and you do something like some breath work, and you really get what that statement means.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it was people who were living in hotels from the Lahaina fires, or people who had relatives or siblings or pets pass,
Mm-hmm.
or people struggling with addiction and sobriety, like the gamut, the
Mm-hmm.
myriad of human experiences that were really delivered to us in our direct community is like profound medicine just to witness.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why we created this podcast, the Embracing Human podcast. Is
Mhm.
how do you embrace the full human experience and spectrum of all of it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm curious what that journey has looked like for you to embrace, whether it's your humanity or just the things that you were, whether you want to call it karmically delivered to work through in this human experience.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe a little glimpse into what that journey has been like for Nick.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll probably go all over the place with some of these stories, but I wanted to speak to what you were talking about in the circle. You know, I came up on my spiritual journey, really started with sobriety and recovery, and that happened in groups and in circles with 12-step fellowship. And one of the things that was really attractive to me about that space was there was a feeling of honesty. You could feel that people were telling the truth about what had transpired in their lives. And so for me, being somebody that carried a lot of secrets, I feel like that was part of my childhood from a young age. Was there was things that were happening that were scary, that were confusing, and I didn't understand. And on top of that, there was an unspoken rule of not talking about it. So that for me is where I feel like developed what I call a spiritual malady. There's I think a part of humans that want to have a transparent, clear dialogue, to not keep secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not the message that was received from me at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to live in my head, and I started to create a lot of stories that weren't in alignment with what I consider to be the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I found recovery, really was attracted to a community of people that were being honest about what's transpired in their lives. And I thought that was unique to a journey of addiction. And what I've discovered with the Breath of Life community and with the breathwork circles is it's not so much about identifying as an addict or an alcoholic, but what's really been fascinating for me is to hear, to your point, the raw truth that comes when people breathe. Mm-hmm. And when people get past the protection parts in the mind and they share. And it's that same truth that I was attracted to in 12-step recovery communities, in those circles, that actually comes through in the circles with the breathwork as well. And whether it's, mental health challenges, or whether it's, suicidal ideation, whether it's grief, whether it's depression, shame, guilt, these are all the things that really underpin the addiction as well. But for people that come to the breath work, that might not be their experience. That's not the way that they escaped, but it's a myriad of other things. Mm-hmm. And so creating the fellowship that I craved was less about identifying as a particular challenge or diagnosis or whatever, but more about that human experience. And so what I started to discover was, wow, like we all have it. Mm-hmm. None of us are immune. And so whether it's workaholic, whether it's technology, whether it's codependency, whatever the label is, it's there. Mm-hmm. And when we breathe in community, man, some of the shares, man, they just hit my heart, just like early on in my recovery journey. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow. Mm-hmm. When I first started to hear it, it was uncomfortable. That's why it took me 6 years to get sober before I actually was able to maintain sobriety. Mm-hmm. Was because I was like, ooh, are you supposed to be sharing that? Mm-hmm. Right. And then there was a part of my system that was like, especially at the group level, but then I discovered later that my spirit does crave that, but it just wasn't prepared at the time because the secrets were still there. It was still uncomfortable in a way. But now I discovered it's like, we got to share it. Just let it all go. I know there's an appropriate timing, and I think there's a way in which you can share it that doesn't have to go into graphic detail.
Right.
But just to understand that you're safe to share it.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of how I came up in the group setting for sure.
Yeah, you said a lot of things there that deeply resonated. One of them being growing up, hearing, we don't talk about this. This is just in our family. And I heard that a lot. And I remember telling my mom at one point, I was like, well, I'm either going to talk about this or I'm going to take my life. And she's like, you should talk about it. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for finally giving me the permission that I wasn't giving myself, because I'm meshed within your approval to do what I need to do to have peace of mind. And it is an interesting thing, you know, and I'm glad we're going here, because what I have noticed, and I was just talking with Leo about this recently, was this call that we're all having on a deeper level of authentic expression. And everybody's version is different, but the end boss that we're up against is the identity of ourselves, of who will they think I am? And will they judge me, or will they reject me, or will they X, Y, or Z me? Regardless of that, I know who I am, and can I be called into that? And it is an initiation for so many of us lately in that regard. And there is something really beautiful about the witnessing of another. And I think, if nothing else, the space to the space that we create for people to see themselves in the reflection of what they say to others is so deeply profound. Someone once asked me, or I was holding a breathwork circle in Ohio before I left, and one of my participants came up. He'd been there for at least a year, and he looked at me. He's like, I get it now. And I was like, you get what? And he goes, I get why you do this. And I was like, tell me more. And he goes, you create space for people to be themselves because that's what you needed. And I was like, yeah, that's actually it. Like, it's a space where I don't have to have it figured out, where I'm allowed to be in my pain. I'm allowed to be in my upset, or my resentment, or my disappointment, or my bitterness, or my rage, or my grief, or my whatever, and still be loved. You know, and I think that's something that, like you said earlier, we just weren't given, as, not all of us, but like a lot of us weren't given as children, as like, you get to be you know. And so then later in life, we're learning and practicing that. You mentioned, you know, this journey of sobriety, and I think you probably, a month ago, just hit 10 years.
11
years, right? I'm curious of what that, you know, you said, you know, it took you 6 years in this circle and some of these other tools. I'm curious, what were some of the, because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are interested in living a clearer life, I'll call it.
Sure.
I'm curious what some of those tools that you found were. And then I asked ChatGPT about your book, which apparently you're on ChatGPT now. So you've made into the algorithm. And what the maybe later half of that looked like when you found, whether it was spirituality or breath work, and some of those tools that you've integrated now.
Yeah. So the recovery journey. So recovery, by definition, means to regain something that's been lost or stolen. And you mentioned imagination and creativity. And I've discovered that has been my gift since I was very young. But that was interrupted. Curiosity, the creativity, and that imagination. And those are some of the things that I had recovered. Substance abuse helped with a lot of those things. The parallel that alcohol and drugs create a spiritual experience, you know. So what I've discovered through my research and my studies, and Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, wrote a letter to the founder of founder of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1961, was Bill Wilson, about the relationship between God and alcohol, spirits and spirituality. And I would apply that to other substances as well. And what I've discovered, and this is my theory, is that what alcohol and other substances do for us is they create the ability to live in the present moment. And for somebody who started to potentially not feel comfortable in their own skin because at a young age you weren't able to process the fear, we start to live in our head and we start to become uncomfortable in the present moment. And some liquid courage comes online. I'm not fearful of rejection anymore. I'm ready to do my raps. I'm ready to talk some shit, and those are things, gifts and talents that I had from a young age that I did before I ever started to consume substances. But yeah, man, it was like, you find this courage, artificial means of this courage. And so, Carl Jung talked about that as being this spiritual solution to whatever was going on in your life. But the challenge being it wasn't sustainable. And those windows of courage and presence that came from drinking, smoking, using, they became more short-lived. And then came the consequences that also come online with that. And so that was kind of my journey for a long time, was, not feeling comfortable in my own skin, not knowing where I fit into the world, feeling separate, different, and alone, and then having a substance that allowed to be like a lubricant for life. Oh, I fit here now. And then really aligning myself with other people that came from similar backgrounds, broken. I like to call it perfectly broken now. But other people that didn't have fathers, other people that came from backgrounds similar to mine. And all of a sudden you realize, like, I'm part of a fraternity of these kind of people, And I had a moment actually when I was at Reggae on the River. I think it was Kaimani Marley, but he sang a song. It was called I Miss You, Dad. And it was about Bob Marley. And I looked around the group that I was with, and there was probably 20 of us. Every one of us came from that similar background, I was like, damn, his dad, his mom, both my parents, his dad, his mom, both my parents. And I was, of course, loaded at the time. So I'm like, wow, like, this is us. I found this tribe of people that all come from a background of pain in a similar way. That was the challenge for me with getting into sobriety. This was the fabric of my life. This thing was a part of it. The music I listened to, the people I hung out with, the culture, the identity of it all. And so just to go, okay, no more, it really underestimated the power that had in my life. And so I could get little periods of time here and there, but then the behaviors would come back online. And, something like shame would get triggered. And immediately I would lean back to the substance, whatever it was, but not really knowing at the time that's what it was. I know this now as I've gone through the journey of sobriety. And but at the time, it's like, if you don't have any other tools, then boom, that's all I have to make myself feel better. So, long story short, after experiencing a tremendous amount of suffering, and, we talk about people trying to take their own lives, suicide. And I always thought to myself, I've never considered myself suicidal, but using IV drugs, using crystal meth, using heroin, using the gnarliest narcotics in the world certainly don't display any level of self-preservation, and so I was definitely trying to kill myself, but it was just on like an installment plan. Right. I had a moment of clarity in my last treatment center, and I had come to a Y in the road, basically. And throughout my journey in life, I had people that would enable me financially. My grandmother, my grandfather were divorced when I was really young, but they both had some resources there for me. And they both felt kind of sorry for me because of my parents, who they were both very aware of and their challenges in life. So it was easy for me to ask for help and to be enabled in different ways. And I remember I was in my last treatment center. I had been experiencing homelessness. I had not been able to hold down a job. I wasn't able to see my daughters for several months because of my conduct and behavior. There was an opportunity for me to go into a longer term sober living program over on the Big Island. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have my grandmother help me again, get me an apartment. After I got out of treatment, I would just kind of navigate through life again. and she didn't think that was a good idea. I was at a recovery meeting that night, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. There was an opportunity for a 6-month sober living program, or there was my idea, which was have grandma help you get an apartment. And I had like a week to figure it out. And so I told her on the phone that morning, I said, hey, listen, I wouldn't mind going to this sober living program. It's called the Bridge House. It's over in Kailua Kona. And it's actually up Mauka. But, and I said, I wouldn't mind going there. But the problem is that they're using crystal meth up there. They're not sober. And I don't want to jeopardize my recovery. And the interesting part about that story is I didn't premeditate that. It just came out naturally as I was trying to manipulate another apartment to live in. And during that conversation, she said, I don't care what you do. You don't have to go to the Bridge House, but I'm not going to help you. And I remember I was like, wow. And that was right after I said, they're using drugs up there. She goes, well, I don't care. They're using drugs up there. Find another place, do something else. But what we're not going to do is get you an apartment. I was like, wow, this is fucked up. And so I went to a meeting that night, and somebody shared something eventually changed my life. And he said his whole life he had suffered from self-deception and self-delusion, and that he would manipulate the outcome of a situation out of fear, try to manipulate the outcome of a situation out of fear by turning the tables and manipulating. And he said, I manipulated everything and everyone until there was nothing left to manipulate.
Right.
And it just hit me. I get chicken skin now. And I had just tried to manipulate grandma that morning. And it wasn't an attempt. This was a language that I spoke.
Right.
And so I go, oh my gosh. And I'm sitting there. This guy that was my spiritual advisor, which we call sponsors in the recovery community, was encouraging me to go to Bridge House. All the therapists thought about I should go to Bridge House. All of my other fellow recovery associates thought I should go to Bridge House. And there was only one person that didn't think it was a good idea. And it was me. And so I'm sitting there, and I heard a voice. And the voice said, Nick, you're trying to do it again. And you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't do it anymore. And for a long time, I thought that was a voice in my head. I've discovered later that I think it was from my heart. And because it was quiet, it was a quiet voice. Most of the voices in my head were louder. And this came from a deeper place. It said, you can't do it. You can't do it anymore. And so at that meeting, I told this spiritual advisor, hey, if there's actually a space up at the Bridge House, I'll take it. And he said, you might stay sober now, which is interesting.
Right.
And I've stayed sober ever since. And you know, there's a lot of other things that came from that, but I call that my moment of surrender. So everything up until that point, the 4 other treatment centers, the thousands of meetings, all the different things that transpired between the first treatment I went to and that moment was my journey to surrender. When I decided to take a right instead of a left, my entire life I would have gone left. If grandma would have said, hey, let's get that apartment for you, I don't want you to be up there with those shady people, then I wouldn't probably be here right now. Right. And so that was the moment of surrender. And for me, when my journey of recovery really started.
I really appreciate the way in which you framed that answer, because I was expecting for you to talk about something like breath work or, whatever. And your answer was listening, which is great, because how many people don't actually listen to themselves? Because they can't, right? Like the amplitude of that sound is very low. It's very quiet.
It's like a whisper.
Right. And for so many people, we live, what I like to say is we live in an attention-based economy, or a distraction-based economy, and attention is the currency. And how many of us are, wait, sorry, what? Sorry, what'd you say? Like I'm paying attention, but I'm not, and
sure.
And what a macro of the, or micro of the macro of like paying attention to that voice in our body, not just in our head, but like, oh, hey buddy, like noted. It's such a beautiful thing, the listening aspect of this whole thing. It was funny because there was a point in that story where like I was hearing you, right? I was like paying attention, and then I was listening because then I forgot about me being like, oh, at some point he's going to stop talking and there'll be something I'm going to say. And then you stopped and I was like, shit, we're there now. Like, now what do we do? And it's that wonder, you talked earlier about losing imagination and creativity and then finding it exogenously, sold to you. And, we come back to the wonder and the beauty of the present moment and being like, God, this thing is infinite. This is actually it. It's the whole thing. And to find a level of surrender into it. What I think everybody wants, is this comfortability in the now. I was just sitting here thinking about it because like Luce's like walking around, pulling on these cords and spilling 2 of my drinks and just like, okay, and she's been a really beautiful teacher for me now as a puppy. I got my last dog when he was 4 from my parents. Yeah. So now, being a parent to a toddler and letting her be, experience. Oh my goodness, like letting her be the catalyst to explore my anger and just like, oh yeah, like you are going to elicit this in me, you are going to bring this out. And I'm curious what the journey of parenthood, we're both girl dads, just what the journey of parenthood was for you and becoming a father. I'm curious what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, well, it was kind of like, I think of before sobriety and after sobriety. And one of the interesting things about growing up the way that I did, oftentimes when I was high in situations where I was like on different benders and being up different hours and kind of having conversations about my childhood with people and really telling myself, this is before I was a father, if I ever have children, I would never do this to them. I would never be a drug addict or whatever. And then that was actually one of the motivations for becoming a father. It was like, if I have a kid, then I will be responsible. Then there's going to be a shift internally that says, now you're going to stop this behavior. And although that was well-intentioned, that just wasn't the reality. And again, underestimating the power of compulsive addictions. And so when my daughter was first born, and I wrote about this in the book because, I talk about my childhood, but I certainly did not let myself off the hook. I shared in detail about the suffering that I caused my own children and people that were close to me. And so my daughter was born. I was at the hospital. I saw her come out, and I decided that I was going to go celebrate, And when you have a child, the mother stays the night at the hospital. So I couldn't stay the night at the hospital. But the good fathers, the loving fathers, usually stay in the car outside, wait. And that wasn't the choice I made. So I went out that night and ended up, I was supposed to be there at 8 a.m. to pick up the mother and my newborn child. And I went out all night, and my daughter's mother's father had to come to the house to wake me up. And I proceeded to go to pick up my daughter about 10:30 when I got there, just a little bit late. And I got into the room where they were at, and I said, "Where's the bathroom?" Right over there. And I proceeded to vomit into the toilet. And then I drove them home after. So that was a painful experience. And instead of being overjoyed and, wanting to offer some relief for my daughter's mother, I passed out at home, and she put Coco down on the bed next to me, and we both laid there. I was hungover, and she was just coming into the world. And so, that recovery journey that I mentioned to you about those moments when I got sober, my daughter was 6. Now, after getting sober, that was just a part of my journey. That early fatherhood and relationships that I had with my kids was greatly impacted by my choices. And I had to own all that. I had to take ownership. For most of my life, I wanted to blame my conduct and my behavior on the way that I was raised and the things that transpired in my life as a victim. And so the process for me into recovery has been to take ownership and own my shit. And that was part of that process. Fortunately, recovery changes everything. And people just want you to be healthy. They just want you to be a part of their lives, and they want you to show up. And so for the last 11 years, that's what I've been doing, and repairing relationships. And my daughter doesn't even remember me being that person. My older daughter, a little bit, but not so much. And we have incredible relationships today. And, that was a big part of my recovery journey, because when I came back to Maui to be closer to them and to be involved in their lives, some interesting things transpired. My life was really good on the Big Island. I started working in the field of substance abuse treatment. And the Big Island was an island of rebirth for me. Like I was reborn in a way to where before recovery and after recovery happened.
Right.
And everything changed. I could see things in vivid color. I could smell things. I could feel things. I could hear things. It was just all my senses came back online in a different way that I had never experienced. And, but then I had my daughters on Maui. And my spiritual advisor then again said, hey, I think besides your sobriety, your number one responsibility is to be a father. Number one. And that resonated for me. And so even though I had my community there, I had all of the things that I had developed in relationship on the Big Island for that 20 months. Once I started to pray about being back involved in their lives, the universe opened up, and I was offered a position to open a place called Maui Recovery. And that was in September 2015. And when I moved back to Maui, I got right back into a schedule with my daughters. And then within a year, my daughter's mother started to have some life issues come online. And she said, hey, I'm going to need you to take Coco full-time for a season. And that season has now lasted for 9 years. Full-time, 7 days a week. She's been with us. And my whole recovery journey, that first 20 months, I didn't know this at the time, I know it now, was preparing me to be a father. I had to go through all of those things internally, hear the heart tell me, you can't do it this way anymore. Take all the steps that I took, being of service to community, being of service to other people, living a life that was centered in being of service, to prepare me for the ultimate service commitment of being a father. And I didn't know it. I was like, wow, this is what they're doing. This is what's happened to me. And so then I had Coco with me ever since. And then Stacia, her older sister, didn't live with me, but was always super involved in my life. And so the deep sense of gratitude that I have for those relationships, and now, of course, my wife as well, and she's a stepmother who has been just the most amazing stepmother. It's one of my biggest joys in my life, seeing these kids grow up and seeing the people that they've turned into. My oldest daughter's a pilot. My daughter's done yoga training. She's done, these international exchange programs. She's thinking about trying to apply at NYU, Like I got expelled out of 10th grade for selling weed. Now I had the gifts and the talents to do all those things, but that presence of somebody as a parental figure wasn't present in my life. Not sure if that would have changed things, but I have a suspicion it might have. And so to see my daughters launch into life in such tremendous ways leads me to believe that we've done something right. You know? And they feel safe in their systems, and you're like, wow, okay, cool. What a gift. What a gift to watch and witness.
It's beautiful, the contribution that we get by, like you said, your sponsor said, step 1, your sobriety. Step 2, be a father.
Yeah.
Father yourself, father the other.
Yeah.
Be a father in the world, you know, like, yeah, it's just a beautiful, long-term, slow burn, not instant gratification practice to be of service to others, which only is possible in your service to yourself.
Yeah.
Tell me about Paulina coming into your life, the mission that you two are on, what you see possible, and what's exciting about that.
I was hoping you were going to ask that question, because my journey through sobriety, so like you mentioned, father and myself, reparenting myself, that process helped me abstain from substance, but I still had a big problem with relationships. And so I was a 33-year-old man when I got sober, but I was still conducting myself like a 17-year-old adolescent when it came to relationships, and still seeking that escape through sex. And so in my heart, I'm talking spirituality. I am sharing my truth, connecting the dots on some internal stuff, but acting out in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
And this is creating a soul sickness for me. And I'm telling myself in my mind, I don't want to behave this way. I want to experience love relationally, but I'm acting out impulsively. So in my heart, I want love, but in my mind, I still don't know what that is. And so this compulsive, habitual addiction, in a way, escapism through sex. And so that pattern continued for the first 4 years of my recovery, my sobriety. And I got into a painful situation. I write about this in the book as well. And there was a sequence of these different relationships that I got into. And they were all based on physical attraction, a level 1 surface physical attraction, followed up by a compulsive pattern of just wanting to have sex right away. And so I'm like, gosh, this is painful. And it's causing suffering and harm to others, because sex is a sacred exchange of energy, but I'm not honoring that. And I'm not honoring my masculine energy and able to have discipline there. I'm leaky. My energy is leaky. And so the pattern was basically this. I would hook up with somebody after I found out we didn't have an emotional and a spiritual connection, which I already knew beforehand, but the physical craving took over and I did it anyways. That started to create a discrepancy between my head and my heart and cause suffering. Well, then the last person I got involved with did that to me. And it was devastating. Oh man, it rocked me. I was like, And so I seeked out some help when I was a little over 4 years sober. I'm a single father and I'm trying to navigate through life. And I want love, but I don't know how to give love. And I keep confusing sex with love, which was a pattern that was displayed to me as a child. And so I hook up with this spiritual advisor and we go through a process by which we inventory all of these relationships that I had got into. And he goes, it's mighty interesting that you're so shook up about this last situation, because it looks like you've done that 10 times. And now you're devastated. And I was like, oh. So sometimes people suggest when you get sober that you take a year off from relationships. And we always have a joke. We say, we don't know if that works because nobody's ever done it. But intuitively, I had heard these things and I knew that I needed to make a change. So, he didn't tell me to do this. I heard that voice again. So you can't do it. can't do it anymore. So this is kind of like surrender number 2 on this journey. And I surrendered and I said, you know what? I'm not going to have this sacred energetic exchange until I know that there's a spiritual connection, an emotional connection, then a physical. So I took a year off. And I remember thinking like, how are you going to do that? And we're like, well, how does you end up in these situations? Well, there's the DM, there's the online dating, there is the, going to sit next to the person that you're attracted to. There's the eye contact. So then I started to like really have this awakening about how I navigate through life with those same patterns. So boom, stop. And I got to see similar patterns to the drug addiction that was manifested through the sexual addiction as well. And I decided I don't want to cause any more suffering.
Yeah.
If you can't help anybody, then at least don't harm them, right? And so that started. And after about a year is when I met Paulina. And the universe put her in my life. And I was totally in love with her from the moment I saw her. And she was a person that loved herself and has taken care of herself, but had her own journey as well that brought her up to that point. Although I wanted love and I wanted that compatibility, I wasn't ready before. So after taking the year off and being able to do more internal work around that, I was ready. Yeah, I was ready. And, it's interesting, like, you get different signals and you get, like in the hero's journey, they talk about, the call to adventure. So this was like, for me, it was like the universal call of commitment and love. And then there's the refusal to answer the call.
Yep.
And we hit the ground running in our relationship. It was just like, we love each other. We're doing everything together. We're spending time together. And it was like, it was like I knew her my whole life. And it might have happened for her a little bit differently, but for me, and then, about 9 months into it, all of a sudden I started to focus on some of her shortcomings, and things started to annoy me and to bother me. And I was going through it. It was like, what is going on? And fortunately, I had a spiritual advisor in my life, and I reached out to him and I said, hey, I don't think this thing's working. He's like, with Paulina? She's perfect for you. And I was like, I don't know, And he goes, well, let me ask you, like, how'd you guys meet? And I was like, well, we were at CrossFit. We both love fitness. We went to a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat because she's raised in Plum Village tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh Buddhism. I go, we laugh together all the time. We like to do our meditations, our exercising, and all these connections that we have. We both have connections in substance abuse recovery. We have similar traumas in our background, and I kind of start getting excited while I'm telling him about how we hooked up. And he goes, okay, now tell me what's wrong. What's the problem here? I don't know. He goes, I think I know. He goes, this sounds like the historical wounds of abandonment that you went through.
Yeah.
And now you're projecting that onto her to try to sabotage this love.
Stakes are real now.
And I was so grateful for that conversation because I left there and I was like, wow, so grateful that we had this dialogue. And then I just realized that when you are in relationship, all of your old traumas and these historical wounds of abandonment come up on the surface and you start to project. And so, those things transpired in our first couple years, and I would say in the first year and a half. And then I asked her to marry me. Yeah. Probably the best decision I made after getting sober. Because once you make that commitment that, I want this to be forever. I want to commit myself to you. Then all that kind of leaky energy that's going out externally, thinking about other things and not being solid, go away. Right. And now you're in partnership, in true partnership. And since that point, our vision, our goals together became a real team effort.
Right.
And now with her, it's interesting because for her and her journey with IFS, which has led her to a level 3 IFS practitioner, and now she's becoming a doctor in psychology. And then I found breath work at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So both of us, that's been about a 6-year journey for each of us. And now we're blending the two together with our coaching programs and with our retreats and with the Breath of Life journey and the whole thing. And so it's been overwhelming, but it's also just been like a calling. It hasn't been, that's one thing that I noticed. We call it like the universal winks, and it's when you're in this kind of flow of creation and inspiration, and it just starts to happen.
Yeah.
And so you kind of can't get out of the way. So it's been, because certain people have relationship and marriage and partnership, but they don't do it together. Somebody goes to work or they do their thing, and then, both people have career or passion and paths, but to do everything together is a unique thing. And it can definitely test the relationship. But for us, we've been able to do it with a lot of ease, and it's been fairly effortless in that way. And Thich Nhat Hanh says that true love is supposed to make you feel free. I believe that. And so I've felt a lot of freedom in our relationship because she came into a relationship with a single father. And so to handle all the nuance of that and being a stepmom and to have to deal with everything that goes along with that,
right,
has been incredible to witness. And I have so much admiration and just love for her, for the way she's stepped into those roles. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing about the 9-month mark. I heard a quote recently that was like, I don't trust any relationship that hasn't been to the edge of annihilation. And, you said something a couple minutes ago about like, when life is happening, you can't get out of the way. And it's almost like I heard the opposite of like, it's actually the identity of who I think I am has to get out of the way of allowing life to be like, this is what we're doing, unless you want to get in the way of that. And, that goes for sobriety, that goes for, partnership, that goes for entrepreneurship, and upgrading the version of ourselves that we believe ourselves to be so that we can align to the vision, to the mission, and to the potentials of what we believe possible. And a lot of it starts in that repairing our relationship to imagination and wonder and curiosity. I'm curious. So you mentioned, the breath work and, so you've got the journeys and you've got the retreats and the coaching. And I'm curious what you see possible for the future of the mission, where you want to take it, what you see pairing with, Paulina's love for IFS and psychology and emotional wellness. Like, where do you see this going?
Well, the reason I fell in love with breath work was because most of my life I lived in my head as a safety mechanism, as a protective mechanism, which living in the head, because it feels safe through intellectualizing and conceptualizing in a loop. What feels unsafe is being in our body. And the body keeps score. The body holds so many emotions. And the body is where the creativity happens. And so I've discovered this on my journey, that true healing, like trauma, and some of these unresolved challenges, repressed and suppressed emotions, come from the bottom up. And so what we believe in is like a bottom up process. So you shake it out, you yell it out, you howl it out, you cry it out, you laugh it out. And you can unlock some of these stored traumas if your system feels safe. And so there's a lot of people that struggle and suffer because they still live in the head, and that's connected to that protection mechanism, which allows them to breathe shallow because the mind has been programmed to prevent us from feeling and to stay in these habitual patterns. And if I can't get into my inspiration, my respiration, and my heart, then the creative energy won't come online. And so it's not so much about abstaining from substance. It's about learning how to love yourself and honor yourself. And that starts in the body, from my perspective. So when I found breathwork, I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I can't believe it. I had a massive spiritual experience. I was crying. I got to witness myself getting married to Paulina, but at the time we were just dating. I saw my daughter when she was born. I got to connect with my grandfather who had passed, and just in an energetic way of visualizing and connecting. And I just couldn't believe it. So I thought, wow, like, people in the recovery community say that we need a couple things to recover: a spiritual awakening and a shift in consciousness, shift in perspective. And Eckhart Tolle, who is one of my favorite teachers, says that a spiritual awakening is simply the state of being more aware than being lost in ruminating thought. So back to that safety, that loop of repetitive thought in the mind. And then there's this consciousness that comes online. So what I thought about conscious connected breath work or spiritual awakening was, well, how do you create such an experience? And spirit, the original meaning, espiritus, the Latin word means breath, wake up, right? Christ consciousness means just to wake up. Buddha means to wake up. Well, how do you awaken? How do you wake up? The breath. And so I'm like, holy shit, we found it. We found the missing link. And so that was part of my motivation for writing the book. And, different studies that I looked at where PTSD victims were taken. There was one done with Emma Sapella at Stanford Research Institute that was really important for me to see with PTSD veterans. And they found that it was yoga and breath work, but they found that the people that consistently stayed with the breath work found that the PTSD symptoms didn't return. And I thought, oh, wow, this is what we struggle with as addiction. It's what we all struggle with. And so that inspired me to continue my own journey. And then we found IFS. And that's another part of that bottom up process, to where we're not just talking in circles about old stories, but we're dialoguing with internal parts and asking what we really needed and what was missing. And most importantly, what would you rather be doing? What would this part rather be doing? How would you feel if you weren't burdened by this? How would you feel if you were unburdened? And so those processes for me have created a lot of freedom. And so I think that with the recovery paradigm, and I've kind of moved away from the identification of some of those labels.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about IFS is it doesn't like to label or diagnose.
Right.
It's just parts of ourselves, which feels, for me in my system, feels better. I have a part of me that struggled with addiction. I have a part of me that, it has my ADHD part, whatever you want to call it, right? And so being able to create communities where this new language of the heart can be beneficial to people, because people do need community. I think that's part of the human experience, is to want to connect. And I think people want to have autonomy around how they identify. And so that is the paradigm that we are creating. And we think that it can have really revolutionary impact on the world. And so, and just one person at a time. And so where it's going to go, I'm not super sure, but I feel like in this climate that we're in the world that we live in, the culture that we're a part of, that we need transcendent communities of shared love now more than ever. And so where people can come together and share in those ways, because deaths of despair are at an all-time high, suicides, overdoses, just, there's a lot of suffering happening right now. And so just to be able to be a small part of that potential solution really feels good, especially with, again, the climate that you see in many different arenas.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the need for more authentic, loving connection in the world. I think about, it was actually a meme I saw during COVID. It was like the most gut-wrenching yet true, as memes are. It was SpongeBob SquarePants and Patrick walking away from a burning city. And it says, "We flattened the curve. But in the fire that was the city,
Mhm.
it was like overdose, domestic violence, abuse, suicide, deaths of despair, like,
Mhm.
and when we flattened that curve, we just turned it into a hockey stick,
Mhm.
and it's just through the roof now. And I believe, through my own journey, there's such an opportunity here for us as men to have these conversations, because men are 5 times more likely to kill themselves, 12 if you own a gun,
Mhm.
which is just insane.
Yeah.
It's a true assault on masculinity, the lone wolf syndrome, and, don't cry, or if you do, you're a pussy. Like all this stuff that's just so barbarically just cruel to men. And it's surely something that we were not taught. The vast, vast majority of us, even when we were angry, it was go to your room, and having compassion for the parts of us that were hurt. One of the most beautiful things Amber ever said to me, my partner, she said, not to live there, but sometimes, Scott, you do have to feel like the victim, to give yourself the space to feel I was victimized and abused and all these things, so that it can cycle, to allow myself to inhabit these energy forms so they can leave my body. And for the vast majority of humans, let alone men, like, we get close to those feelings and the parts come in like, no, 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 we don't get angry, because if you're angry, you're going to be violent, or you're going to be a degenerate, or you're going to be abusive. And these parts are so, in some moments, confused of like, wait, am I going to be the one that's going to be abused? Because I feel the violence, or I feel the rage coming. And I love that you guys have paired IFS to something like a somatic practice like breathwork, to be like, hey, it might feel unhinged for a little bit, but just know that you're the, as I say, gas in the brake to your experience, so that you can find safety in some of these feelings, so that they have a way to titrate out. Because something we talked about earlier is cultivating a nervous system that is capable of holding this imagination that we have for the zest of life again. And you saw that possibility and that awakening with, whether it was marrying Paulina or connecting with your grandfather or seeing your daughter being born again, like all that stuff. So you're like, whoa. And that breath of life that comes through, right? That just invigoration again of like, okay, here we are again, new stage. As I don't know who said the quote, but every level has a new devil.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
and it's really beautiful, because you and your relationship with Paulina and your entrepreneurship has been an inspiration for me of like, oh yeah, I came here to heal. I did not come here to build a business, and so as I've done a lot of that healing work and new therapy modalities and all the stuff, being like, okay, now I'm going to go start my version of this and create more community and in different pockets, and just see that, like, man, it's such a counterintuitive thought, but if you can't dance when the world is burning, you're missing the point. Because it is, we have an opportunity to still see the joy and the laughter and the love that is so right here in front of us, unless this thing is a screen.
Yeah. Right.
And then all of a sudden it's like, no, it's doom and gloom, and it's separation, and it's death and despair. And it's like, have you seen the look on the auntie at the market that just is stoked that you bought a papaya? Like, and to see that, in a picture you post with Pauline and Coco hiking Coco Head or whatever, just being like, oh yeah, like there is equally the love, if not more, and being the stand for that in the world is, yeah, it's so needed. So thank you for doing your part in that, starting with yourself.
Yeah. Thank you.
Your creative process in letting art come through you.
Yeah.
And your intention with it.
Yeah. So I've had a gift and a talent since I was a kid for poetry, for like spoken word. And it started out in a real innocent kind of way as a kid. But I also had that, like, I don't want to say a troublemaker, but I was somebody that got excitement and enjoyment out of making people laugh, right? Kind of like a comedian would. And so I used my gifts with the words and rhyming to do so. And if I had to make fun of somebody or, talk about the way they were, what they're wearing or what they look like, then that was a part of that. And, probably hurt some people's feelings, but I got laughs out of it. And then, I came up in an era kind of in the urban culture where, there was your mama jokes, and there was, rapping was a competitive thing where you're talking about somebody else's appearance or you're this and that. And so, but getting the approval from other people was, I was like, oh, wow. And then people are like, hey, do that again, say the thing about the girls again or whatever. And then I would do it. And so the rapping came right along with it. And rap culture in general comes from a past of brokenness and pain and suffering. And so I connected with that community immediately and was embraced by it, being a white guy. But that for me somehow has never mattered in most of the cultures that I've been involved with. The part of the hip hop culture and the people that I was involved with, there was an objectification of women. There was a glorification of this lifestyle that was no longer something I wanted to be a part of. But there's also conscious hip hop. And there's also other styles of hip hop that don't get as much attention because it might not be a part of the agenda that you were speaking about earlier of negativity. And, I've always wondered, like, why are the most popular rappers the one that talk about pimping and prostitution and selling cocaine? And then some of my other friends like Lucas Mack or Londrell that are talking about love and consciousness, they only have a fraction of right? And so I don't know if that's by design or not. But
good question.
I know. So what happened to me when I discovered breath work is I found myself getting into my body, getting out of my mind, and tapping back into creativity. And it's interesting because our mutual friend, Aaron Marshall, was somebody who I met who actually reintroduced me to breath work. And then as we started, how he is a musical guy and he's always creating and designing different things. So he was the one that heard my rapping because he raps and sings too. And he's like, you have to bring the rap back in with the breath work. You got to do it. And I go, okay. And I had some different raps and some different poetry and some things. And so that's when that mission of wanting to get people to do breath work and trying to find creative ways to do it is where that inspiration for rap came. So using dope beats, making rhymes go with it. And so this new album that I have that's coming out, which Lily Fangs is on several songs, Kale is on the breathwork track, where I'm fusing breathwork with hip hop. So there'll be little breathwork practices throughout the album. And then there'll also be hip hop on some of the songs as well, and some singing. And it's funny because Lily Fangs, I was like, I don't like my voice singing. I like my voice, but to sing is different. She's like, no, we're going to sing, fam.
Right.
We're going to sing. I'm like, okay. And so that has been such a beautiful experience because facilitating breath work, and you've sat with us and you've heard the way that I facilitate. It was such a beautiful reintroduction to that creativity of using words and poetry to facilitate. And I think that's another reason why I love our style of breath work, is because there is that piece of taking people on the journey with the words that you're saying. And so, well, that's been a gift and a talent that I've had my whole life, expression through words. And so I didn't realize this when I started facilitating breath work, but it's really, it's like you're writing music. It's like you're telling stories and you're inviting people to look at different parts of themselves. And all of a sudden I realized, like, oh man, the universe has given me the perfect platform to use my expression. And so now to come back into the creativity with the music has gone kind of hand in hand with it. So to, have the book, practice, and now the music being involved with it, for me, it's like, that inspiration or that imagination is just like my inner child's like, yeah. We're doing it. Like, this is what you'd rather be doing. Right. And that was the question when I go on my internal journey of, you mentioned the screens, getting stuck in the screens, getting stuck on the TV. For me, when I was left home alone as a child, my first escape was the screen. The TV made me feel safe. Well, now the TV has become in my pocket and I can get lost in that world of the digital thing. Right. And that's where all the chaos is. And that's where all of the projected pain from the unprocessed collective trauma of this earth is. and everybody's just casting spells at each other and shaming and blaming and projecting and denying. And when I get off of there, I kind of feel nauseous.
100%.
And so when I ask myself, what would you rather be doing? I'd rather be writing. I'd rather be reading. I'd rather be doing what we're doing. I'd rather be doing all these other things. But you have to honor that part of yourself that can get stuck in those moments.
Yeah.
And be aware of it, and then decide how you're going to navigate through it.
Yeah. Oof, yeah. It's the new game, or the other quote is, the new devil is cheap dopamine. Right? Like, so many people are just wrangled by their addiction to dopamine. And it's, for so many of us now, it's a screen. You know, I want to make a reel of like someone being like, 11:11, amazing, yo, it's 2:22, like, oh my God, it's like 4:44. And it's like, at the end of the night, they're like scrolling through their phone. It's like screen time notifications, 17 hours. You know, it's like, we're so like handcuffed to these things now. And to your point about honoring these parts, so that we're not trying to bulldoze them and be like, just lock your phone away. It's like, that'll work for now, until the part's like, hey, remember the other way we used to get this? Let's do that, you know? And it's like, oh, it's just a new thing now. I love the compassionate and curious approach to exploring these things and not trying to make wrong. You know, just being like, oh, that's really cute. Tell me more. You know, why do you do that? I'm actually curious, you know?
Yeah.
The part's often like, who's this guy? Where's your pickaxe? You know, like, where's the torch? You know, it's like, oh, I put it out. I lit the candle with it, actually, and I just set it down. What's something that you wish people knew about Nick?
I'm somebody that's a fairly open book, you know? I don't feel like there's anything that people don't necessarily know about me. You know, there's a part of me that has recently wanted to publish more about my feelings of the current climate that is out there in the world.
Yeah.
But I've also wanted to protect myself as well from opening that door.
Yeah.
And I've found myself in conflict around that, because it's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to do this, then this is now going to be your new identity in a way. So I've kind of tempered that and redirected it towards the Breath of Life journeys. But there is a big part of me that kind of has this almost an obligation, I feel like, to do some of those things. And but then I also have to look at my own internal biases that I do have and the way that I've seen the world. Yeah, that's something that has been on my heart, but I've also been trying to think of ways that I can do it without it being so polarizing.
Right.
Right.
I can deeply resonate with the feeling like it's part of my dharma to talk on the not necessarily political, because I don't think it's that. I think it's the overarching spectrum of fuckery that's going on in the world today. Of just like, are we really going to like let this slide? Like, we're not going to bring this up. And there are a lot of people bringing it up, but to your point, exploring the personal biases of like, who am I to think that I know better than life's intelligence of how this thing should go? Like, life's pretty intelligent, and I'm just me in that machine.
Right.
And so I too have most definitely tampered my desire to be, and the podcast has been part of that. Of like, this isn't blasted on social media. You got to find this, which means you're likely like on my team already. At least as it stands. To like be like, yeah, this is kind of weird that we might have to like show papers to get into Costco at some point. They're already doing it. It's a phone, you know, it's like, deep. You can buy your 2 pianos now. Like, but you know, to just be aware of the climate, you know, both literally and figuratively. If you had a message to share with the world, what would it be?
The message is to listen deeply to others. And that kind of goes back to the last statement I was talking about, is that I think there is a climate of projection rather than listening with the heart. And if we seek to listen and to understand, then we can create commonality. My message would be to listen deeply. And that's been something that I've had to learn how to do. And I think that people want to be right and they want other people to understand their perspective instead of listening and understanding others. And there's something that's really attractive and satisfying about being right and making other people wrong and making other people feel small. I think we have to get away from that. And in order to do that, we have to listen, in particular with people that have different views than us, different ideologies. And so to listen with the heart and to listen deeply will create less suffering in the world. My process, I listen to Ram Dass a lot and some of the older talks. And, one of my new songs is called Becoming Nobody. And so I think if we can tap into that spirit of the soul versus this physical duration, then we're less concerned about how much money you make. We're less concerned about where you come from. We're less concerned about where you went to school. We're less concerned about who you voted for. And you see the bigger picture in a way. That's the kind of energy that I want to have and I want to embody. And I think if we're able to do that, then we'll be able to transcend with love. But as long as we're blaming and shaming and guilting and pointing fingers at people, that's not going to happen.
Right.
It's not going to happen. That's why I'm trying to be careful about my message when I do bring it to the world, because I want it to come from a place that I don't know the answers.
Right.
I don't know. And we live in a world where people want certainty. Whose fault was it?
Right.
Who's responsible for this? Nature, nurture. And we have to look at the collective that we're all a part of to understand the nuances that are there. And so that's going to take some deep reflection on people. And facing yourself and your shadows and doing your internal work is scary for people. It's easier to blame. It's easier to point fingers. If they would just do this, then I would be okay. If people just thought the way that I thought, then we'd be all right.
Right.
We see that in a lot of spaces right now, the inability to take ownership, the inability to have compassion and empathy for other people. And I've always been somebody that stands with the oppressed, with the people that come from less fortunate backgrounds. And I always will. And so, but we're all humans as well. The message that I would have for people was to listen with the heart and to try to become nobody.
Right. There was multiple times that it was like, ding. One of them was like, people would just think if they thought like me, then everybody would be okay. And it's like, yeah, but most people who think that way aren't actually okay. So it already is not working. The second one was that you talked about the Ram Dass idea of becoming nobody, right? And so I think the quote is something like, first you have to realize you're trying to be somebody, to become nobody, to then be everybody.
Yeah.
Which most people hear that and they're like, you know what? I think Ram Dass missed it. Actually, I'm going to try and be everybody because that'll make me a somebody. And then I don't want to be a nobody.
Yeah.
But the reality is like, in noticing the futility of like trying to be someone, we realize how everybody's doing that. So I am nobody to most people.
Yeah.
And then in that being like, oh, that's everyone, and it's a practice that most people either don't know is happening or don't want to take on because the thought of becoming nobody is so excruciatingly painful because it reminds us of our childhood where we were, at least we took on as nobody to somebody. And in that sharing of that is like, oh, everybody's doing that. And yeah, it's I love the way in which you're letting your own spiritual practice and your creative craft become a non-biased exploration that some people will witness. It's not an agenda. It's not like you've got to think this way. It's like, hey, this is Nick's version of this. And you can like it. You don't have to. Like the beat's dope.
Yeah.
But if you don't like that, like you don't have to hit follow. I don't mind. Like I'm not going to be mad. And so then it is fun.
Yeah.
Then it is a little kid again, getting to play in the sandbox of life.
Yeah. That quote, becoming nobody, was, Ram Dass has the documentary on his life. But it comes from a Sufi mystic, Hazrat Khan, who I want to say passed away in the late 1800s. And he calls it becoming nobody. And he says that basically the personality wants to hold on to something, to individuality. But the moment that you're able to let that go is the moment where earth ends and heaven begins.
Yes.
Because by becoming nothing, you become all.
Right.
And it's really just profound, prolific, and eloquent the way that he, spit that game, right?
Sure.
And you're just like, wow, this is dope. And then you're like, who is this freaking Sufi mystic from this mystical sect of Islam? And you're like, whoa.
Right.
So it's super dope.
What's Nick's understanding of what it means to be human?
My understanding of being human, come into the world as this soul in a body, and we get introduced to whatever our surroundings are. And from that point, the language that you speak, the way that you identify, all happens in those early developmental stages. I think we're born with this vast, infinite knowledge and a deep understanding of the connection that we have into this universe and with the soul. But depending on that environment, we lose that understanding. And we start to really believe that all we are is the suit, the exterior. And then that can become painful because that's finite. And then immediately that physical duration starts to become, depending on which system you were raised in, it becomes an inevitable pain or a fear of what's going to happen in the afterlife. That experience that we're all going through, I like to say I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. It has all of it. The pain, the joy, the suffering of humanity and being a human being. My understanding of what that looks like has been evolutionary over time. And on this exploration of discovery, it gets more exciting and more vast. Because I come from a place where my world was really small, and now it's just really opened up. This process of the physical human duration is just a glimpse of a greater experience that I'm excited about as well.
Yeah.
The human words and the way that we describe and the language, it's like ineffable. It's more of a knowing internally.
Right.
But when we use words to describe God or human, it never quite fits.
Right.
Because words are limited, but we do our best.
Yeah, I like to say that our measly human mouths cannot make the actual sound of the name of God. But we can try. I don't care if you call it Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Allah, Spaghetti Monster. You can't acknowledge that there's something bigger than us happening. Like, whew.
But there'd be a big parallel if you'd asked me, what is my understanding of God? To that question, what is your understanding as human? And I don't think there's a huge separation there.
No, I agree. As above, so below.
Yeah.
Last question. Where can people find more about Nick and what he's up to and to experience some of his magic and creation?
Our website is breathofliferecovery.org. So a lot of our offerings are there. Our primary social that we use the most of is Instagrammer, and that is Breath of Life 808. So those are the two main places. And then also the book, Breath of Life, Finding Long-Term Recovery with Breathwork and Step Work, is pretty much anywhere where you can find a book. So Amazon, of course, is everybody's probably number one option, but Barnes and Nobles and different bookstores and stuff like that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love that. Well, thank you again for your time and attention and offering and love into the world. It's beautiful to witness and inspiring and transformative. So thank you for being here to give the listenership a glimpse into your life, and then also just being out in the world doing it, living your Dharma and spreading your words.
And thank you. I mean, this is not easy to set up. It takes a lot of persistence and dedication to do these kind of things. It's not an easy process. So I really, really am grateful for you, for the journey that you're on, and for everything that you're sharing with the world. So thank you so much.
So well.
Bottom of my heart.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Awesome, y'all. Well, thank you for another episode. Thank you for being here. If you want to learn more about Nick, you can check out the links he mentioned, and stay tuned for another episode. Aloha.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the interview today. And if you haven't already done so, please like or follow us on whatever platform you're listening to, and let us know if you have any questions or comments or requests of future interviewees.
And we hope you find this inspiration, the clarity, and the direction to fully lean into being human, whatever that means for you. Aloha.